ESO Daily. Once again, it's Mystic Raven, and today I'm actually going to be showing you guys how to test your penetration as far as your builds go. It was kind of funny. Somebody had asked me, Mystic, how much penetration would you say a player needs? And that kind of becomes a very good question, given the fact that, a lot of people, you got Spinners, Spriggans, all these sets with penetration, Night Mother, and also your champion points, sharpened, a lot of different variables when it comes to penetration. And for me, I'm always making the adjustments according to what I'm seeing in my builds. So each is slightly different. But I definitely want to kind of show you guys a trick that I learned into alligating and how to, determine whether or not how much penetration you're really going to be needing and whether or not you can do this. Like, you can test how much penetration you need. So the first thing I'm going to tell you guys is I don't have my DPS set on. I have my farm set, but it actually works out really good for my test because what it allows me to do is slot the Nirnholm instead of the sharpened because I'm a Magicka build. Now, obviously, if you're a stamina build, you would want sharpened because you do not have that in your passive. So I'm going to go down here first, and we're going to take a look inside our passives. Okay, so when we go down to light armor, okay, and we go into concentration for light armor is giving them 4,884 for 5 or more pieces. Now here's the trick, guys. You can actually slot 6 or 7 light, but this number isn't going to go up regardless if you put another 1 or 2 pieces. Now your recovery would, but your concentration, once you hit 5, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get 4,884. Okay, so it's better off to go with the Undaunted. Now when we take a look at the medium armor here, right, there is nothing that gives them penetration in their passives. Okay, so that's why, Stam characters are really needing that sharpen more than Magicka. Because Magicka does get penetration. The one thing that Magicka players aren't getting, though, is spell damage. Which, guess what? The stamina players are getting weapon damage. So that's kind of your offset. So where do you go from there? Well, that's a good question. Because when we take a look at the champion points, both classes are able to alligate penetration. Either through spell erosion or for stamina, it's piercing. So when I take a look at my champion points, now for the sake of test, for the test of this, we went ahead and we put everything, 23 into Elemental Expert. I usually like to stay right between 21, 22, 23 in Elemental Expert. We're actually not going to be moving this today. But Elfborn's at 23% because a lot of people will stack. But keep in mind, I put the extra difference into Spell Erosion, which has only given us 587. So 4,884. Now we're sitting just barely over 5K penetration. Okay, so the next thing I want to go ahead and do right here is just use funnel health. I'm not going to use any builders. I'm not going to use any buffs. I'm not going to try to grab the empower or the mark to begin with. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is see what I'm critting for. My base is 8.7. My crit's at 1609, right? Well, that's with my current penetration. So I'm going to keep testing this to make sure I have a pretty accurate number here. Now see, as you guys can see, I'm dealing less on the spiders. Okay? Alright. Now keep in mind that, guys, I haven't used any mark or any increasing penetration effects as of yet. So basically, I just kind of want to get a ballpark figure when I'm doing tests. Okay? And trolls are really good because they usually have a higher resistance. So we'll go ahead and we'll hit up the troll. And you guys will see these numbers fluctuate. Okay. Now what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to take a pretty average single target that I can pretty much just keep testing on. So the Spriggan here is kind of a perfect example. So that's given me 14,663. Okay, so basically now what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to throw the mark. I'm going to try to increase my penetration, thus increasing my DPS. That'll kind of give me a base of what we're dealing with here. So when I take a look at my skills, the mark is going to give me an additional 5,280, right, towards my penetration. We're going to see how much that's actually going to increase my DPS. So as you guys can see now, instead of 14, I'm in the 15 range. Want to stay on that mark target just to kind of get a base down. Okay, and because I used the mark, it went up a little bit, so. Okay, so 15,700 is now what we're increasing because we put about 5,000. So what I want to do here is that I'm actually going to decrease my crit damage to increase my penetration, right? So I'm going to go back into my champion points, and then I'm going to redistribute them. So we're going to go ahead, and we're going to bring this down to, let's say, about 15%. And then I want to allocate everything else over into my erosion, increasing my penetration. Now, it's not going to give me the 5,000, but it should give me close to 3,000. So that's kind of giving me a nice little marker here that I'm going to be getting 4,884 on top of the 2,807. Now, once again, another thing I'm trying to do is scale back the mark DPS. So basically, I want my mark to deal less damage than what initially was doing. So we were at 15,700. So I'm actually trying to increase to get the penetration to decrease in damage, thus giving me a marker. Okay, we're going to do without the mark. Now there's 14,600, so that's increased. Now we're going to go ahead and hit the mark target. Now we've decreased the damage. You see how that works? So we were doing 15,700 without the mark. Now we're dealing 15,87 because now we've increased the penetration over what the penetration, meaning we're getting 100% penetration. We have too much penetration now for this set mobs. When we're in dungeons, the mobs have a little some more resistance, but bosses always have a high amount of resistance. So what I always calculate too is how much damage am I dealing to the mobs. Now obviously I can go ahead and pack everything into my penetration, but I'd be lowering my base damage considerably, and that's not worth it either. So I have to find a happy medium. I have to go ahead and compromise how much penetration I'm actually needing. Okay, once again. All right. And there's the 1587. So now we're actually stabilizing our DPS regardless of how much penetration, but we're losing some. So if I wanted to, I could go back into the champion points and then again make those adjustments. Now keep in mind, these are lower, less resistant mobs. So when I'm in a dungeon, this might not be too bad for me. I'd have to test it per dungeon. I'd have to run the same dungeon twice and calculate whether or not that's too much penetration on the average mob. On bosses, you can never have enough, and this is true. But once again, am I willing to sacrifice my base damage to increase my penetration? That becomes the question. Now, for a lot of people who are going to ask about PvP, you know, a lot of people wear impen, so crit becomes less needed in PvP. So even though I don't give you PvP builds, I will tell you I will typically never put too much into Elfborn. I'll always, you know, put more into penetration because I'm increasing the base damage and increasing the penetration. That is giving me a little bit more push towards the impen DPS. So if anybody's going to ask that question, there it is. Don't ever say I didn't help you guys with that. So there's how I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to go ahead and redistribute a little bit less, see if I can get past the 1587. So I want to go ahead and I will drop it down to about 25. And this should give me about 16%. Bingo. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go back up here. Now, once again, I want to go ahead without the mark and get the base. The base crit is 8.3 for base and 14.6. Okay, now I want to go ahead and use the mark. Now, keep in mind, guys, there are a lot of effects and abilities that's going to give you penetration depending on each class. That's another thing to kind of keep and remember. But for me, this is definitely going to see if it's going to be an increase or a decrease. There's the 15.1. So now we were dealing 1587, now we're up to 15.1, so that's an increase. So by increasing the crit and decreasing a little bit of penetration, we get a little bit better number on that. So to calculate how much penetration we've actually increased our DPS by, we can do that mathematically. So we're looking at 4,884 for the passive into light armor. Now we go ahead and we take a look at the Reaper's Mark. That's 5,280. So we're looking at around about 10,000, a little over 10,000 just in that perspective. And then you add the champion point difference, which has given us another 2,546. So basically we're sitting at almost 13,000 penetration on general mobs. Okay, now I would actually, like I've always said, I always like to stay between 12 and 15 depending on, you know, my circumstances. And I always would tell people that that's kind of a really good number there. So if anybody's ever questioning, you know, how much penetration are you needing? Once again, on boss fights, you can never have enough. But once again, are you willing to sacrifice base damage for penetration? To me, that's not worth it, because even though I might be getting a higher pen, I'm dealing less DPS. And that's what this test is showing you guys. So if you guys have any questions or comments, that's how I test for penetration. Now, once again, PvP, all rules are out the window, but I really wanted to push out how much we could you know, allocate here. Now, keep in mind, guys, I'm not using any sharpened weapons. So if you add sharpened weapons to this factor, you don't have to use, you know, your marked target. So let's say you're not going to use a marked target and you need a little bit more penetration. That's where you want to go with the sharpen. Okay, so but if you're not getting any other penetration, but of course if you are getting penetration by other means, that's where Nirnholm will actually out DPS the sharpen. So once again, guys, that's how we kind of calculate the penetration numbers. And there's not a lot of mods for PC players when they're actually questioning this. So you kind of have to do the test manually. Now they do have test dummies coming out for dummies who don't know how to test these things, so they can set up probably, and I imagine they're going to have an adjustment where you can adjust the skeleton to you know, general mobs, dungeon mobs, trial mobs, dungeon bosses, and trial bosses. Typically, that's how test dummies are set up in every MMO. You have different amount of resistance or armor rating in different games, and how you actually test your parse if you're going to be running a parser. But I've been doing this for a long time, so I don't need a parser. I already know how to test my base damage and how to work the numbers and, you know, kind of find my happy medium. So once again, guys, if you have any questions or comments, post below. I hope this video really helps a lot of people and allows you to go ahead and test how much penetration are you needing for your build, and whether or not you want to go with sharpen, if you want to go with an ability that gives you penetration, and how that is affecting your DPS. So once again, guys, I appreciate everybody for watching, and once again and always, have a nice day.